Hello and welcome to another episode of the podcast. I hope you are doing incredibly well or incredibly, whatever you're feeling, I hope it's incredible. Whether it's incredible gas, whether it's incredible joy, whether it's an incredible craving. I like the word incredible because I just think some words need to be highlighted more often. I think we need to, just like how we have days of the year, I'm just giving you concepts, like you have World Mother's Day, you have World Observing Silence and Maintaining some sense of decorum Day, then you have keep your opinions to yourselves, you asshole Day. I think we need to have that, but clearly that's not going to happen anytime in the near future. But days like that, I think the day's getting boring. Earth Day, Planet Day, or World Disability Day, or whatever the rights of people are. I think it's just ridiculous, right, that we have all these stupid days. Anyway, but what I'm trying to say is that we need to have a day for certain words, which are either abused, used loosely, whatever you want to call it, like awesome, or I don't know, too many words clearly, but I think 365 should be fine. I think that should be a thing that I can practice. But credible is something that is associated with someone who's credible, a person who's reliable, credible. He's a credible source of information, or a credible source of it's usually credible is something that you need someone from. He's a credible person for to sort of borrow money from you, because he'll pay back. He's credible. But it's usually in that context. You don't say he's a credible fuck. That you don't say that usually. I don't know why that thoughts either go from finance to fucking. It's an F to F kind of format, B to B, F to F. But hey, there's something I realized. For the longest time now, I get I get a little kind of upset with myself because I find myself getting irritated with kids, with infants, with the way they behave, the way they and I thought it was because I can't communicate with, especially before they start talking, I can't communicate with babies because I can't make eye contact, I can't really read their body language, and they seem to smell a little bit, they aren't really clean, and they put their fingers in chocolate and they smear it in their face. They're just pretty messy beings. So I thought it was babies that I was upset with, especially, you have the typical, baby's on a plane, ha ha ha, there goes my flight. But I really thought, and then I was hard on myself, going, how can you be irritated, get annoyed with babies or with kids? And I mean, I think from the age of infancy to almost 6 to 8, 7, I kind of just stay away from them, right? Because they just, I don't know, they're a bit loud, they're a bit kind of unpredictable, and they just suddenly woo, sugar, and it just startles me. And then I just feel bad, going, how can you feel like that? These are kids, they're innocent, they have their whole lives ahead of them, and they are basically just kids. Then I would be hard on myself, going, then I'd be, why the fuck are you being hard on yourself? These kids you've done nothing, you've just sort of felt, and you have every right to feel the way you do, and then you apply some philosophical filter about, every emotion has a contradictory or has an opposing force. If it's negative, then it has a positive somewhere else there, and then I end up going like, so exactly, manifests as gas usually. But then I realized it's not the kids, it's not the infants, it's not the babies, it's not the kids I have a problem with, they are kids. And I think that was a very, very good understanding that I made myself to come to terms with in my mind, saying these are just kids, they are what they are made to be. And of course, certain energy spikes are obviously going to happen as a result. They're kids, they have a lot of energy, and they have a lot of things that are new to them, environment, a lot of inputs. Their brain is just discovering the world around them. There are new things that are being exposed to these brains, these senses, and they have an overload, and I suppose we all with that. The people I have a problem with are not even the parents. In many cases, of course, the parents. In some cases, of course, the parents. Who knows? But it's the people around these parents. It's the adults who interact with these kids. Because if you've noticed, maybe you haven't, that's why you listen to this podcast, that adults react in a very sort of high-pitched, obnoxious, cunty way to kids. Woo! Ouch! Hello, it's all extremes. It's like, it's so cute. It's everything the kid does, incredible, amazing, cute. Why? I mean, That startles me. And the kid reacts, ooh, and like if the kid falls, like, oh my god. If the kid does something like, oh, the kid said a word, or the kid made a noise, or the kid did something. It's everything is exaggerated when adults deal with kids, and I just find them annoying. So kids, you guys are cool. Babies, you guys are perfectly fine. Infants, even more incredible. But the adults, oh, you bastards, you know what you do to these kids. You raise them up, you build them up, you put them on all this pedestal, you create all these sense of hopes, and you kind of big them up, and then you kind of scold them or you whack them, you bastards. So adults are the problem, I think, with everything, whether it comes to animals, with pets. Us adults, singularly, a bunch of cunts. And I'm so glad that I can say it. And I've come to the source of what's annoying me. It's not you. This shout out, this episode goes to all the kids who are listening to it. Yeah, all the infants who listen to this podcast. A for appreciation, B for this base construct, the C for this cunty perception of the world, D for dynamic microphones, E for what? I can just do this, but I probably wouldn't. Just to put you anyway, I'm very happy that I arrived at the source of my annoyance, and I'm glad that it's not babies. I'm glad it's not children, babies that become children, just like tadpoles that become frogs. Glad it's not that. It's not like my problem is that with babies, and then it's like, oh, but I realized, yeah, it was babies, but it's the so-called more mature and fully formed version of a baby, which is the adult human, which is annoying with all the things they do. It's crazy how we were babies, you and I listening right now. I mean, I'm not listening, I'm talking. I'm listening at the same time, I suppose, when I talk. We were babies, and then we grow up and make these babies, model them into something that we weren't and we aspire to be, and feed them with our insecurities and our hopes and the things that we were longing to do in our lives. And as a result, make them into something that we wanted to be, but end up becoming a fucked up form of neither. And as a result, they push back, and then we push back, saying, no, you must do this because I couldn't do it. And then you protect them, saying, no, I was exposed to this, it's not good for me, therefore it's not good for you. It wasn't good for me, therefore it's not good for you. I tried this, it wasn't good for me, therefore I'm going to put you through it because I'm not going to put you through it because I'm going to protect you from it. And by protecting them from what we think was bad for us, we end up depriving them of that experience, and as a result they crave it even more. Of course, not things like, oh, we fell down a mountain, that was bad for us, I'm going to think. Of course, certain safety things are good, but other things like, oh, I think the education system's fucked, I'm not going to send you to school, I'm going to homeschool you. And as a result, the kid's like, no, but I want to go to school and find out for myself. So what is the right balance? I don't know. Is it through trial and error? Do you want to try and have trial and error with your kid? Or do you want to be extra safe? Do you want to sort of be the other parent going, do what you want, figure it out? I don't know. I think there's a balance. I think there's a safety net which you need to provide, a sense of structure, or a sense of this cocoon, this sense of love that they can understand that irrespective of what the world throws at them, of what they try and what they fail and what they might learn and hurt from, that they have this cocoon to come back to. I don't know. Look where this went from. Yeah. But in any case, I think it's the adults. That's what I want to say. Anyhow, let me move on, because I have a lovely guest coming on today's episode. He's already here. He's been here. He's done that. He's a dear friend. His name is Scott Capurro. He's a comedian from San Francisco who lives between London and San Francisco with his husband. He was gracious enough to join me on the SoapyRao show. I like the word gracious as well. Did I just mispronounce the name of my own podcast? The SoapyRao show. Said it very sort of SoapyRao-ish. And Scott and I have been friends for quite a few years. I had, what's the word I want to use here? Good fortune, or the privilege, or the honor. I had a ball of a time sharing the stage with him in Bangalore, and he was kind enough to give me, did he give me spots? No, he gave me introductions in London when I went for the Edinburgh Fringe back in 2017, but we also met for dinner at a tap-ass place. It was pretty tap-ass. And we've been in touch. He's... he does a bunch of shows across the world, especially in London. He's a regular feature at the Comedy Store, which is a comedy club at Leicester Square. In Leicester Square. You don't say at a square. In Leicester Square. He also does shows in the United States of the Americas. He's in California, of course, in San Francisco. He had a special when we first met called Islamohomophobia. He talks about that concept of homophobia in society. And in this episode, it's interesting. I wanted to get his perspective on how COVID was, the lockdown, of course, in San Francisco, and how married life for him is and was. Also, what sort of how do people sort of accept him, because his husband's from Brazil, and that community which his husband's from they're more conservative, and how they kind of accepted, or the kind of issues he faced, or him and his husband faced once they got married. Also, I wanted to understand what it's like and what it was for him growing up as a gay person in the 70s and 80s and 90s, and how the entire issue of homosexuality was processed by people, how it was accepted, or was that intolerance, and what the landscape looked like compared to 2022. So, well, needless to say, Scott is an amazing human being. He's a lovely gentleman. He's a really funny comedian, and I'm very lucky to call him a friend. So you will enjoy this episode. You can thank me later, and I'll thank you now for listening to this episode. Do share it with someone you love, or someone you like, or someone you can, well, maybe just tolerate a little bit. Yeah, and this goes out, as I said, to all the babies, the infants, and the children out there. Yeah, much appreciated. Enjoy the episode. Till next time, goodbye, God bless, take care of yourselves, and cheers. Scott Capurro, my dear friend, welcome to the SoapyRao show. I think it's an official welcome to my podcast. How are you?
I'm fine. How are you?
I'm good. I'm so glad when it felt weird. Somnath sent me a sort of screen grab of what you had sent, and I'm like, I know Scott, and I was like, it felt really good to hear from you, and thanks for coming on the show. And how have you been? I think we met last in 2017, at just after the Fringe, I think, when I stopped by in London after Edinburgh. And I think since then...
We went to dinner at a really nice restaurant. You had your friends with you, and you're, I think, a companion.
Yes, my wife and a few of her friends. And you, I forget what that place was. I think that was the first sort of time I've actually spent more than 24 hours in London. And it was quite interesting. Like, a lot of the... post-work. I think I went out one night, the night before I met you, to Soho, and another night when we went out, and I think the next day I was terribly hungover and almost missed the flight. But anyway, that's 5 years, 6 years ago, 5 years ago. But what have you been up to since then?
Trying to become famous. I've been doing stand-up. And then I was writing a one-person show for the Edinburgh Fringe in 2018 that I was touring in the U.S. About. I found out that. Well, I knew that a relative of mine, my uncle's cousin. My dad's uncle, my grandfather's cousin.
Right.
On my father's side, Capurro, had been a Broadway star in the 1950s.
Ah, okay.
And I knew that he was super famous. I met him once when I was a tiny kid. And then he lived in New York. He used to see my family in San Francisco when he was touring California with one of his musicals. He was a huge musical comedy star. In the first Oklahoma, he introduced "Oh, What a Beautiful Morning" to Broadway. First Kismet production. Yes, so he was this big, right. And he won 4 Tonys. And I knew about him, obviously, but of course, he was like a myth in my family. Like, you have one successful person in your family, this was that guy.
Right, so is Capurro Italian? Just
Capurro, but his stage name was Alfred Drake.
Oh, that sounds nice.
It is nice, isn't it? I like that name too. And he changed it because his brother had the same last name as he did, and his brother was a singer at the Metropolitan Opera. And in his union, you can't have the same last name. So he changed his completely to Alfred Drake to also get rid of the ethnicity in his name, because 100 years ago in the U.S., Italians were seen in a different light than they are.
So there was a bias against them, right? Back in the 50s. Right. It's so interesting you mentioned that, because I was randomly sort of looking through some podcast options a few months back, maybe even 6 months back, and this whole series on the Chippendale dancers came up, and I was fascinated with that whole movement and how I didn't know this, but I mean, not like it makes a difference in my life, but did you know like the Chippendale? You know about the Chippendale dancers, right? Which started off.
Yeah.
You know, the entire thing was started off by an Indian guy, a Bengali guy.
Oh, really? Right.
I didn't know that. So he found obviously these male dancers, and then I think there was some other guy who was an American sort of producer from, I'm not sure of the exact details, but he kind of made the Chippendale act so sort of you know, kind of coveted, so people would fly them across the world. They became the kind of like the divas that of, you know, which we kind of hear about. Male strippers, but also like the following that these women who were, I won't say desperate housewives, but they were these who couldn't really express their kind of outward need for entertainment. They would, and it became like this entire choreographed, this big, larger than life act. And I found that quite, I mean, I never have been for a show, but it's quite amazing when you hear of these things. And just with your uncle, and the Broadway kind of phenomenon is so much larger than life sometimes. And you kind of don't connect that this person is in my family, right? It's quite cool.
Yeah, it's true. It's true. Yeah. I grew up watching Broadway performers on TV, you know, hoping to emulate them someday because I started as an actor. And I knew of this person, again, in our history. But you're right, he seemed like this huge figure that, you know, I could never have any contact with. And that's why when I called him, the first time I was in New York in the early 90s, I was there doing some stand-up. I called him on a public phone, and I reached him at his apartment in New York. He's probably only about 2 kilometers away from where I was calling, but it seems so far in a different world. Even the way he spoke in that sort of standardized stage English in the US, which sounds kind of British, but not really.
Yeah.
He thought that I was my father when he was speaking to me. Because he was old and a bit senile probably, but also he probably had never met me really as an adult, obviously. So he referred to me as my dad by my father's name, Nicholas. And he started to ask me all these questions about my mother, who he would have met, but whom my parents they separated long before, and saying these things to me about my mother that I didn't know. Like my mother had a beautiful mezzo-soprano voice. Is your mother still singing? Is your wife still singing? He asked me, Nick, is your wife still singing? And then I told my dad this recently because of COVID, we've been spending more time together because I'm waiting for him to drop dead. I want his money, and he I really want that money. And he
is your uncle around though? Sorry, is this uncle around?
Well, he's 86 and smokes all day long and drinks, but he's fine. It's really
your Broadway uncle?
No, sorry. This is my dad.
Oh, your dad. Okay, no, but your Broadway uncle.
Alfred Drake. He's been dead for quite a long time.
Okay,
yeah. Okay. He's my grandfather's age. He was my grandfather's cousin.
Okay, so this was in the 90s when you called him from the public phone, right?
I called him. It was
right,
and he's still now quite well known. The myth of him is the name Alfred Drake, but at the time, obviously his live career had ended, but he was still on TV a little bit. People still knew who he was, and my dad recently outed him to me and told me he was gay. And
he was gay.
Alfred Drake was gay, not my father. That Alfred Drake was gay.
Right. No, your dad, of course, you would know, right? If he was. Right?
Yeah, exactly. And my dad is not. He's not gay worthy. But anyway,
okay, yeah, you need to define that.
Well, Broadway, you got a couple of Tonys. The gays love you, right?
Right.
So,
absolutely.
But so I'd written a show about that, about my father outing all this stuff that we just discussed.
Right.
And the last time I did the show was March of 2020 in California, and then the COVID happened.
Oh no! I think you had reached out to me. Was 2019? You had planned something, and you were kind enough to think of me when pitching the lineup for comedians at a brewery somewhere outside San Francisco. Remember that when you reached out to me? That was a while back. And then everything sort of just went out of sync because of the lockdown. And
I remember we all just sort of lost contact with everything. It was so strange. It's like there's a breakdown of every sort of communication. It was so strange. I
mean, especially with we would of course communicate if we were traveling to each other's cities, but even otherwise, generally, how's it going and this thing. I would just send out a thing like if I'm coming stateside or coming to the UK, or you would sometimes drop a message. But I mean, that entire sort of connect with the kind of common ground, which was stand-up, kind of just disappeared under our feet. So we didn't really communicate for those 2 years. But I saw that you had put up a clip a while back, and that was I forget that which that it was to do with the yeah during lockdown. I think you'd put up something about masks and about the thing, and I found that quite hilarious. And your turnaround time with that material was quite good because everyone was sort of trying to find an angle which was not repetitive, right? And I think that was really nice the way you were talking about it. Am I mistaken about that clip? I think you put something out,
No,
right?
it's probably true. My husband and I decided to go online on IGTV every night,
Right.
and I was churning out material as often as I could, and I
Nice.
was releasing some of the clips on Facebook and on Instagram and on Twitter from the show. If I thought they were particularly interesting, I would release them. We were just busy on social media for a year because there was nothing else, was there? Until
How do you
until
adapt to
like
that? Because I know you're quite a fan of picking on the audience and kind of integrating them into your set, and you've done that in Bangalore, and you kind of the shows you've done here, especially I think when you came in 2015, 2014, 2015. But how is that online experience? Because a lot of comedians, including myself, I mean, a lot of people do it still, because especially when there are people like, we'll pay you for a corporate gig online. I'm like, I'll do it. But did you enjoy it, or did you adapt? And how was that experience?
it almost killed me, the Zoom stuff. I stopped doing it completely sometime in 2021. The IGTV made sense to me because that was a setup in our home, and my husband was involved, and there were people watching that were fans of the radio I do in California,
Right,
and
right.
so we had something of a fan base, and it actually seemed like a regular gig that I could look forward to each night. It put some sort of form to our day because the days became formless during COVID for a lot of people.
Yeah, yeah.
And it puts a structure into our lives. Like we knew we had to do that night. It would make me think about material. But once the Zoom gigs started and the Zoom yoga, because I'm a yoga practitioner,
Right.
it it really messed up my health. I had to stop. And
The Zoom
actually, about a
shows?
year ago in March, I had a little, I wouldn't say a breakdown, but I would say a moment where I hit a wall where I thought, when is this going to end? I don't know if you remember, but March of last year, there was another wave of something, and then another shutdown of the clubs, and then another
Yeah.
lockdown. And I, I became morbid about it all. And
About
I've,
you're saying about the entire situation with COVID and the pandemic and the lockdown,
yeah,
right? Right, right.
I mean,
No,
I've
and you
hoped.
spent one sec, just sorry, just for context, you spent the 2020 lockdown and this 2021 episode happened when you were in San Francisco, or were you in London?
But to and from, we were in London less.
Right,
We were still traveling back because my husband was finishing his degree in law.
right,
He did adult education for 3 years during all this. And then
right.
I was hoping to come back. Also, they'd done some construction on our building, so I had to be here yeah. So we were doing all that, pretending we were busy just to keep our minds together.
Yeah.
Really, we were making ourselves busy. And then um, we went back to the US, and that was when it kicked off. We were in California. And we were in California. I'd gone to Brazil with my husband, so we were busy traveling and stuff as much as we actually could safely.
Yeah, yeah, because
And
that's
we,
another
we
headache, right? Being
yeah,
quarantine, travel, all that
insane.
kind of stuff. Yeah.
And my husband at that point, didn't hit Brazil right away, the COVID, but it did eventually, and he lost a lot of people. So we were dealing with all that, like everyone else,
Yeah.
dealing with the stress of,
Oh, Brett,
death
is he from Sao Paulo?
near Sao Paulo. Yes, you're
Because
right.
Sao
Yeah.
Paulo is in a bad shape. I was like reading about some episodes happening now with their own form of racial violence against,
Oh,
especially the African immigrants, and it's pretty miserable what's going on, and the food crisis and all
you
sorts
know,
of
if you
stuff.
yeah, if you ask some Brazilians, what's the history of Afro Brazilians in this country, they'll tell you that they're not Brazilians because they're black. It's a real problem there. It's a real
Oof.
skin color, not just color, but tone. Skin tone from light to dark is a big thing, not just in Brazil, but a lot of the world, but definitely there.
Yeah.
And the poverty travels north as the skin color becomes darker. It's really awful. Whereas at the same time, you're in Rio, and it's such a beautiful city, and it's so much fun. Topography is gorgeous, and the people are lovely, and everyone's getting along. So
Oh, Rio
it's
is a lot more tolerant and fun than Sao Paulo.
well, no, they're both in the south, and a lot of the wealth is there, and the political power is around there. So I think I felt safe I'm a white man, but I felt safe in Sao Paulo.
Right.
I'm just reminding people. I didn't feel
In case they're not watching the
as I heard that Sao Paulo can be quite dangerous. It didn't seem that way to me.
right.
But of course, my husband knows it, and we stayed in the areas where most tourists reside. But you're right. Poverty, racism. Famously, there's been films made where police shoot young kids in the streets for several different reasons. So and the politicians who run the country right now, Bolsonaro is famously a horrible homophobe, racist, misogynist who has said awful thing, and all that stuff sets up a bit like in India politically. Let's be honest, the top leaders, when they're as decrepit and corrupt as they can be, it sets up a tone throughout the country that's not helpful for people.
I mean, it's happening repeatedly across the globe, right? It seems to be a very sort of opposite ends pulling each other, where it seems like on ground you have these kind of people coming to power who are kind of regressive, and then online you have this entire the woke generation and the extra liberal kind of front, which is just sort of shouting. And you have Greta Thunberg, who's probably going to blow a blood vessel anytime soon, just shouting at the trees or something. It just seems like it's so much noise. But I've heard repeatedly, and also kind of episodes about how San Francisco, and I've been there as early as 2016 for a comedy show, and even before, and I kind of liked the place. Like, I saw how it was a lot more people were struggling with identity in 2016. They were trying to sort of, whether it was their Latinness or whether it was their gender, sexuality. People are just kind of being very loud about it when I went back in 2016. But I've heard, and of course, I want to hear it from someone who's from there and also lives there. How is it? Because you hear about this entire the drug problem, the homeless problem, but also just with the entire intolerance building up. And you're a person who's gay and you're married and you've been out and you celebrate life. And I know that you have a good time and you're open about making jokes about yourself and about being gay and about living in marriage with a husband and a partner. And I love those jokes, and we've met a few times and we've spoken about it. And what is your thought process? Well, I want to get to this later, but since we're on it, we might as well start. But what are your senses about the sort of goings on right now in that space?
Well, I think for some people, political identity is what defines them, and I think that the conversation, and it's not just about Trump, it's about the left as well. The conversation, like you said, became very black and white. It became a lot of noise, and there's very little gray area.
Yeah.
Where it's less savage to talk things out, which is part of the reason why my husband and I prefer to spend some of our time, or most of our time, in the UK. One reason is he's British, but also because I think it's less loud here.
Is it?
Particularly
Okay.
in social media.
Right. Nice.
And particularly in a place like San Francisco where lines have been drawn and people have taken sides. But a lot of that is around a sense of loss, because those identity communities like gay and straight have become, again, like you said, with young people, it's become blurred. They're less concerned because there have been certain rights have been gained, and the
So they're less
battles have been
concerned.
won.
Sorry, can you explain that? They're less
Well, I
concerned.
think with marriage equality in California, I think that battle around, and even gays being allowed into the military, allowed to adopt, I think those battles about inequality have been won in California. And so now
Which is a
the
good
question
thing,
is,
right?
well, now the question is what battle do we have left? Because people like
Right.
to fight in the U.S. They want a common enemy. It brings them together. And the battles have become the right and left now.
Okay,
Right.
so the thing is, you're saying that equality in some aspects of life have been achieved. So now, instead of saying, let's celebrate in this what life we have and rights we've been given, and so that it's like, what's next?
Yeah. Well, like when the Cold War ended
Yeah.
between Russia and between the USSR and America, suddenly the enemies were internal, and suddenly there was a war on drugs and a war on, city violence and a war on all the stuff that was within the country, because we always need something to fund us emotionally
Right.
and financially. But I don't see. I mean, it's become in San Francisco. I've lost friends recently. So for example, since you asked over the COVID battle, Now, look, I am vaccinated, so I can travel and so I can go to yoga class. But
Yeah.
believe me, that's the only reasons. Those are the only reasons. I have a healthy immune system. I also have fears and doubts over the way the whole thing's been handled. I'm not crazy. I don't think there's a conspiracy. I don't think someone's inventing a disease to kill everybody, all that. But I do wonder. I'm just curious
Yeah.
about it, about why things have been handled a certain way, about why certain doctors aren't listened to, about why certain nurses aren't getting the vaccine. And when you ask these questions in San Francisco, you literally lose long-term friendships.
Oh,
People
when
will
you say you
go,
lost friends, you lost connections, you
oh,
lost relationships. Okay, I thought to COVID.
yes.
Okay, okay.
People just cancel, they completely cancel me. And I do think a cancel culture exists, not because I think, again, there's a conspiracy to get rid of liberal artists. I
Yeah.
don't think that's it. What I think is people just they turn the sound off. They can't even converse. And
No,
that's
but
a
isn't that
very,
such a
very,
scary
for
place
comics,
to
it's
be?
hard.
And no, for just generally for social progress, as you mentioned, the gray area, which I find the best place to be because you kind of can make a statement, admit that you're wrong if you're wrong, and you have time to rebuild an argument and also say, okay, I'm going to broaden my horizon, expand my thoughts, and say, okay, acknowledge that I was wrong in my way of thinking about this, but thanks for giving me a second chance and educating me because there's no space for that kind of error in the left or right because you're out of the group, as you said, you're cancelled or you're demonized or you're ostracized for the way of saying something. But isn't this thing, especially for the groups, let's be honest, the ones which are the most sort of heard because they're most loud, like the LGBTQ so-called community, isn't that what they hear with the rights? And of course, I'd like you to also maybe contrast because you came out in a different time, right? You came out to your family and friends in a different time. So maybe can you contrast that? Because just the importance of how a healthy conversation or even a debate or listening to someone versus this, where you're just shouting someone down when they don't suit your agenda. Can you kind of contrast that, like being married with your partner, with your husband at this time, coming out? I don't know when you came out, if you can talk about that, contrast that with what's going on now, and maybe also talk about what this lack of conversation or this lack of ability to kind of hear someone out from the other differing view, what it does to your mindset, especially being gay in today's day and age.
Well, I think it's interesting you ask. I think that people forget that the previous pandemic, HIV/AIDS, really united the community that I matured into. And in the 80s and 90s, that battle brought the LGBT community together.
Yeah.
I mean, thank God for the lesbians because they organized so many events and kept an eye on things while gay men were losing their fucking minds for obvious reasons. I
Yeah.
mean, I lost so many friends that you're not prepared when you're 23 to go to a memorial service for your closest friend. You're not emotionally capable of it. Most people aren't.
You lost them
And
to
that,
AIDS.
that, pardon me?
You lost them to HIV, to AIDS.
Yeah, I mean, I would go to an art exhibit of people who died. I remember going to one in like 1990 and seeing friends of photographs of victims and seeing loads of people in that exhibit I hadn't seen in a couple weeks. I didn't know who died. People would die in their homes overnight, not show up to work. People would die at the McDonald's parking lot waiting for a burger. I mean, people were trying to function and their bodies just completely quit. It was every day you were hearing about it. And I was also trying to tell my family I was queer at the time. And it was, some of my family members were bigoted and this just fed their bigotry. So a lot of people I knew went through all this kind of stress and trauma. And then the public anger from the White House that was just demonizing gay men. We had to educate ourselves and act up about what was going on with our health. And then approach the doctors who knew less than we did at the time. So it was incredibly exciting as well. It was sexually charging, to be honest. And it was a real unifying element of our community. And without that battle, without that, not that AIDS has gone away, it hasn't clearly, but without that struggle to define us, I think that the left, especially in my community, has become less defined. And if you're defining yourself in a certain way your whole life, and then that definition is blurred, then you become threatened. and
Yeah.
suspicious of other people. So I agree with you. I mean, I'm doing some television now for a network in the UK that most social media outlets have decided is right wing. It's just been labeled that way. You can't get around it. That's just what it is. Okay. So
Right.
that's who you are now. So suddenly I'm a right wing comedian because this gig has been offered to me and I took it because I'm a comic. You know what it's like.
Yeah.
And suddenly now I'm on TV all the time with this network. And people are saying, my accountant contacted me and said, "Are you okay?" Why? Well, we saw you on GB News. What's happened to you? What are your politics? I'm like, my politics are none of your fucking business. Was I funny? But also, because I'm a gay man who's not behaving in a certain way, which means I should be left wing, I'm gay, I should be left embracing, my politics should be totally wet and agreeable to
You should
everybody
be
on the left.
anti-vax. You should be
Because I'm-
anti-mask. You should be.
well,
Yeah.
yeah, because because I think that masks at this point are a bit silly. If I even say that, I lose 1,000 followers on Twitter, and these people who are my accountancy, who look after my taxes, are calling me at home, worried about me, about my mental health.
That's a bit
So
ridiculous.
this is what there's the idea, since we're both comedians, the idea that you can make jokes about something that may be, representative of a community that isn't yours. For instance, if I talk about, well, the left said this about the subject, but the right's been handling it a bit better because they've said this, there's no room for that. Now it feels like for some people.
I'm noticing more and more of that. Like you have to kind of have a cause in your comedy. And that sucks.
Or be fingered
right?
by your father. Something has to have happened that made you a disaster. That's put you on stage as a comic. That's why you're so messed up. Or yes, you have to be, a lesbian with horns in a wheelchair. Or it's good to be black and young. Or all these identifiers that make you seem diverse. When really, I was just talking to comedians about this in Manchester this weekend. What makes comedians diverse is their experience.
That's like something which I would just totally agree and appreciate that you said that, because when we met in Bangalore, I was just talking, because of course you have many more years in this comedy industry, and I was just asking you, because I've been told in my thing as well that, hey, you call yourself the blind comedian, you play the blind card, and talking to someone who has this thing that people will expect you to sort of wear on your sleeve, like the gay comedian. But what I notice, and something which you do, and you kind of weave in the fact that you're gay. I mean, of course, you're not hiding it by any means, but you weave it into your material really well. And of course, you do talk about it, and you don't abstain from talking about your gay experience or experiences as a gay man. And that's something I do as well, because I can't take away my eye condition, but at the same time, I don't have to flaunt it as the victim. And I think that's something which you just said now, is that adversity helps you gain a perspective that gives you strength in the face of people rejecting you for who you are. But you also, the same thing kind of my mom told me, she's like, you don't have to flaunt it saying, oh, feel bad for me, but go about do it, because when you go about doing and living life with this, you just develop a sense of strength, which kind of makes you a little more resilient to the stuff that will eventually hit you. And I think now the narrative is opposite, and especially in all aspects of life and comedy, since we're both comedians, is that it's almost like you have to have these 3-4 things. Like the more labels you can tag along, like saying, as you said, if you're black, if you're a single mother and you're gay and you're a lesbian and you have a child with a disability, the quicker you get spots. It's just, I don't know what it is, but why does a comedian have to have so many labels versus the complexity of the experiences that make them that unique individual and human being, right? Which is, I find, stupid. Like, it's almost like, I'm a woman, I'm gay, why aren't you giving me a spot? I'm like, because you're not fucking funny. That's
it's bigotry. It's just old school bigotry and homophobia, misogyny in action. Actually, to be honest with you, I just think
it's almost like a reverse, right? Yeah.
I think it's bad for the audience because it lowers their expectations of what comedy can be. But it's terrible for the comedians who aren't prepared for any sort of success yet because they haven't learned how to do stand-up or tell a joke.
Yeah.
And you put them in a position, say, perhaps, I don't know, of being in front of 1,000 people. It must be just, unless they're incredibly arrogant and almost brain dead, it must be a horrible feeling for them. But I don't care if someone has a tail and they're pink. If they're funny, it doesn't, and some people are funny right away and they're ready right away for success. Most aren't. They have to experience a bit more. But I also feel like, it's great the idea of putting diverse comedians on stage. It's great that you can now put 2 or 3 women in a bill and people don't think it's a female comedy night. It's
Yeah.
great you can put 2 gay people in a bill. It's not a gay night. And it's, believe me, it's much easier, I think. There's much more accessibility with the audience,
Yeah.
depending on, like, I used to have to come out to every audience when I first started. And I don't obviously do that anymore. And I don't think gay comedians are expected to. And I don't think, I don't think people are thrown if a woman comes and walks on stage. Whereas really, when I first came over in the 90s,
Yeah.
when a woman's name was announced over the loudspeaker, people would boo. And I don't think that's going to happen anymore.
Are you serious? That's okay. That's a bit okay.
Oh, yeah. It might
I mean,
happen
because I had to do
outside
the
of
same thing.
London.
I had to explain what a disability, what an eye condition I had, and still people would come after. They're like, "Oh, that part about your eyesight, that's a part of your act." I'm like, "Yeah, sure."
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, Lenny Bruce had used to describe what the word dyke was because the audience didn't know a dyke was a lesbian or what that meant. But we are now past and beyond that. So we can speak in shorthand to a mainstream audience, which is, believe me, it's fantastic. And I love a diverse bill. I love seeing all sorts of comedy on stage. But when I think of diverse, because I'm from California, I grew up in San Francisco, of course I grew up in a gay and lesbian vegan cafe doing stand-up. So I saw, believe me, people from all walks of life. To me, diversity is more about economic backgrounds than skin color.
Right.
That's just how my mind works because of where I'm from. And when I used to introduce comics when I first started in the 90s, of course I never mentioned their genders. I might get it wrong. In San Francisco, who knows what that person is? It's their business to tell you, not mine. So I'm accustomed to the pronoun thing. It's perfectly fine. Whatever people want to call themselves, I don't care. But don't call me a cis male. Don't non-binary me. Don't label me with all your garbage that you want to use to defend yourself, because that's your thing, not mine. That's your shtick. That's your joke. You shouldn't waste it on me. That's part of your material. That should come up in your act. You should write jokes about it and not become some sort of, I don't know, some sort of a patriot online where you're defending your community. Nobody cares. Be funny. You're not an activist. You're a comedian, and whatever activism that includes, then use comedy to define yourself. The only time I get offended is when I watch a comedian waste the audience's time on stage, when they seem as though they don't want to be there or they don't seem comfortable. Then don't get up there. If you don't have a joke about who you are, then why are you telling me who you are? Don't tell me, show me. It's boring to hear your lecture. I don't care. This isn't a seminar. Show me where the jokes are. Be funny. So to me, diversity is really, particularly in San Francisco, because you asked.
Yeah.
That's where the problem is now, because it's producing more wealth than anywhere else in the world in the history of mankind, because Facebook and Google are all there. So with that kind of wealth, it's going to create losers, poverty, as you may define it. So that's where the problem is. That's where the drugs appear. That's where the homeless appear. I don't think these people are a danger to anyone other than themselves. And in fact, my husband and I were just walking through a homeless community in San Francisco a few weeks ago, and he got a booster shot, and we had lunch. It was actually lovely, that area, because people were nice and said hello and made eye contact as you walked by. So I don't see that as a threat to my own safety. What I see it as is obviously for them a lack of safety because they're living on the street. So how can we take care of this? And these are where the problems and the issues arise, I think. And this is where comedy can help, I think.
Yeah. No, there's a sense of, and what sadly happens is that a lot of people just sort of follow practices that come from America or come from, and I think Europe is a little bit, as you said, maybe a little more subtle. They take some time before jumping on to new concepts, or they're maybe a little more critical of it. And I think especially since you live in England, I think the English, maybe the Scots and even the Irish, I think and the Welsh, of course, we have to include the Welsh, I think they're a little more cynical, and there's like, I don't know, of course it's there everywhere, but I find it amazing in India sometimes when people act woke, and it's almost like they have this pronoun kind of debate going on, when I'm like, okay, fair enough, as you said very sort of aptly, okay, if you want to call yourself whatever pronoun, go ahead and call it, but don't call me out for not doing or using the right pronoun, or don't call out someone for not using the right pronoun when we clearly have much bigger issues to address before we get there. I'm not saying that gender equality is not important, of course it is, but I see this happening where people are like, you need to acknowledge your privilege and be aware that you can't. I'm like, fuck off, dude. I mean, honestly speaking, I didn't have a say in it. I'm appreciative of it, but I'm not going to wake up every morning and go to someone who's not privileged saying, I'm sorry that I'm privileged. It's ridiculous what's going on, right? So,
and I understand that. And yes. And I remember where you live, and you have a lovely house, I remember. And
Oh yeah, we're
I
not.
was,
Yeah, we're not there anymore. But yeah, I mean,
oh,
I
right, right.
definitely I'm in a good place, no doubt about it.
Yeah.
But you can't
I
go
remember
around.
a gorgeous. You were the one of the first people that ever used Airbnb. I'm not Airbnb, sorry, Uber with.
Yes, yes, that
And I
was.
remember, in my mind, this effing limo came to pick me up. It was amazing,
Yeah,
and
yeah,
the driver was so sweet. I was like, God, this is great. It's great to be privileged in India. But
yeah,
also, of course, you're right. You didn't create. You didn't ask for it. It just happened.
yeah,
But also, I think name changes happen all the time. People
yeah,
change the name of streets or towns or who they are. I mean,
yeah,
in America, African Americans are called something different than they were called 20 years ago and then 20 years before that.
yeah.
And it's kind of our obligation as privileged white men, to be honest. It is a little bit of our obligation to keep up. But also, I enjoy it too because I think language and its variance is one of the tools we use in comedy to make jokes.
Yeah.
We play with language, especially like you said in the UK, the English are a bit obsessed with definitions of language and accents. And if you can toy with that, they really love it. And I agree with you. The British can be a bit cynical about general opinions. They're
Yeah.
also it's a combination of cynicism and arrogance, where they think it's not going to happen to us because we're better than that. So
Yeah.
there's that, which is one of the reasons why the pandemic hit so hard in this country at the beginning.
Yeah.
And I think one of the reasons why they still are able to joke about it on stage.
And I think that's
But
important. See, I think being
yeah,
cynical, I think being all that is great. The fact is, I think, and I don't think anything should be off bounds. And this is coming from a guy who's heard his fair share of blind jokes, which of course one is more lame than the other. And I'm waiting for a good blind joke. The sad part is I have to crack it myself. And it's lazy, man. It's like, oh my God, guys, can you, I mean, can you not, what annoys me when it goes past an individual trying to make a joke to a mob trying to bully you. That's what bugs me. I
yeah,
don't like that about
yeah,
any group politics or
yeah,
group identity, right? Where you give up the complexity of what makes you a person, and that person could be a bunch of things. Could be a woman, could be lesbian, could be a mother, could be a
exactly.
sister.
Yeah,
But you give up all of that for one aspect of your identity, and then you make someone feel like shit because they're not. They don't reflect that identity, and I think that's annoying. But I don't know. Like, do you feel? And you spoke about this, but a comedy is a great tool, which, and many people have called it a mirror to society. But when you're not allowed to talk about it, then what do? I mean, how much do you fight back, or do you just surrender and say, you know what, I'm going to take a break? And you're more of course, now you have this gig with the GB News platform, but how do you make a living? Because I'm also kind of just reevaluating. I've been doing this for 12 years, 13 years now, almost, and I love this format, what we're doing right now, podcasting. We're talking because we have time to kind of take a topic and break it apart, or take a thought and kind of understand it. But I mean, from the Zoom shows to just sort of how you getting a Netflix gig is more about popularity than just content. There's so many things you learn about the industry which aren't always about merit or being funny. How have you navigated it? I mean, of course, with all the things we mentioned, being in this kind of climate of people not wanting to hear certain things, to this climate of you have to kind of say the right thing to a right group, or with this entire OTT platforms coming up. So just a sense of you being a live performer, a performer for live gigs and road comic, to shuttling between San Fran and London. It's not a question so much as it's a gauge of where things are for you.
well, I kind of I stick to my guns. It's all I have, and that is I just do what I think is funny. And I think communities, audiences, jokes change all the time. Either they evolve or digress. But the whole atmosphere of a stand-up club each night is what I try to listen to and respond to. I try to be where I am at that moment. I think
Okay.
the audience prefers that. And I think there's a way to deliver jokes, even as unpalatable or impalatable or as distasteful as they may seem. There's a way to deliver them. And if you can find that technique, that's what experience provides. And I think, I still talk about what I still want to change people's minds about the way gay men are allowed to behave. So that's always in the back of my mind. And then I don't care what the audience feels. I know that's terrible to say. I care what they think, and I care
Right.
that they enjoy themselves, but feelings are transient. They change all the time. And if someone raises their hand during a show, hasn't happened in a while, and says, I'm feeling unsafe, I can't imagine, or I'm feeling offended, then I will deal with that as it happens. If they have a thought, like I think this or that, then we can have a conversation.
Yeah.
But feelings are personal and they have nothing to do with me. And the lights are pointed my way. And the exit door is for you if you're offended. And really, it's a live performance, so expect to be surprised. Or else stay home, drink wine, and watch Netflix and don't come to a live show. I just think I make a living by telling jokes. And I, you know, if one person doesn't think a joke is funny, it doesn't mean the joke isn't funny. It means they don't like it.
Yeah.
And I can't offend someone. I don't know them in a live audience. They're strangers to me, and the likelihood is I'll never see them again. And so really for me, the show is about what's happening right then, right there, with what's going on in my life, with my husband's life. Even when I'm on this network that I perform on, they haven't limited subject matter. They give me a list, like everyone, of words we can't say, obviously, because of Ofcom, and we'll be, fined. But
Yeah.
I mean, every comic faces that. But subject matter, they want us to just go for it.
Oh, sorry,
I
one
haven't-
second. You said you get fined so because it's
Oh,
television.
Well, in television, in whatever country, if you say motherfucker or whatever, there'll be, you get in trouble. So there's a list of those words I can't say.
I mean, can't they just
But they
censor it or edit it out?
Well, some of the TV's live,
Oh, right. Okay, it's live.
and there's no 5-second delay on this network.
Oh, so,
So,
okay.
Yeah. But listen, even on radio or TV in the US where they have like 10-second delays and something, if you swear, it's a big problem. Maybe not so in other countries, but in most countries I work in, you've got to be careful. And you know what? I like that too.
No, in our
Because if
country,
you-
in India, it's even more tight because I worked at a radio station for about 2 years, 1.5 years, maybe a few years. And you can't even say the words like Hindu, or you can't even say the word Muslim, because you don't want to plant any seed in the listener's head. And I'm like, I didn't say anything good or bad. I mean, I'm not going to
Yeah.
say a thing, but you just can't say these things. You can't encourage a line of thinking which might be a person in a traffic light saying, "This guy on radio said Hindu. I'm going to go. I hate Hindus." It's almost like you're treating them like ticking time bombs, and all they need is this one word as a trigger, like the Manchurian Candidate, just to sort of send them out of spiral.
Seriously, I know what you mean. In California, I've been told that I can't use the word Jesus on the air.
Whoa. Okay.
So yes, you're right. Apparently, everyone is one lap dance away from exploding, from shooting one another. We are pretty close to cave people, let's face it. And well, they were probably more practical and safe than we are, but
More
So, yeah,
capable
it's a
in some
problem.
ways as well.
yeah, exactly, and more organic. But yeah, so we have to find a way in those limitations, whatever they are, to be funny, which I enjoy.
Yeah.
I wonder if you heard about when there was a famous comedian, Jerry Seinfeld in the U.S., who's still touring. Very funny. But he had an issue a few years back with a joke he told where some students didn't respond well, and he took it to television, made a kind of a thing about it, about how students are so woke, they don't get it, they won't listen, they shut their ears off. And then he told the joke on the Tonight Show in America late at night, and the joke just wasn't funny.
See,
So
I have a
here's the
problem with
problem.
that, whether it's Seinfeld or whether it's you or me. Now we can go in the opposite sort of warpath, saying, "How dare they limit my thing? Students these days are stupid. They have no." But if the joke's unfunny, then you can't defend an unfunny joke as a comedian, right?
It just wasn't.
Yeah.
And I think the students, when I play universities, which I enjoy in the U.S., or younger audiences, I really enjoy it here too. It's my job. I'll be 60 in a few months, and it's my job to find out what people 40 years younger than me are thinking about and talking about. They pay us quite well to do those gigs. The least we can do is do a couple hours of research. Also, it's funner to do that because then it alters your material. You might write some new jokes, and you want to find a way in a room full of strangers to make your material familiar and palpable. That's always been our job. How is it any different with young people who may or may not be woke? I don't really care about that definition. It's kind of useless. But also, maybe there is a community of transgender people at a certain university, and maybe you have to reach them. What have you got? And that's fun. Right? And they may be young and self-identified and think of themselves as very important, and their issues might be something that it's all they can concentrate on. But then it's your job to dig them out of that hole. That's what you do.
And that's my
You
thing.
make
I
them
totally agree with.
approach something.
Yeah. No, I totally agree with you, because I think sometimes even comedians put themselves on a pedestal saying, "Oh, this stupid society, they don't get me, and I don't get," I think as a comedian, sometimes you get caught up with the few, and I think the internet, especially the videos which go viral, are of the few people who we repeatedly hear from, right? And they keep saying this thing, whether it's a few students, the few activists, the few transgender people. And I don't think all students think like these people, or all transgender people think like these people. So I think it's important. That's a really good reminder that you just mentioned to people, that you can't just take one comedian like a Dave Chappelle, however good he is, and say this is what all comedians think like, right? Because Dave Chappelle also is in a place where he is kind of reached his pinnacle of experience, and he's also in a place where he can command a certain kind of attention and a certain kind of narrative. And I don't think, and I'd like to hear that from you, because you just said you're turning 60 and you're kind of in the same place as the Joe Rogans and the Seinfelds, and I'm saying you kind of, over the years, your comedy spanned the decades that theirs did. So what is going on with that right now? Like, do you think what they're doing is kind of just cementing their popularity and their fame? Because what you mentioned, which is a really nice thing, is that you have to keep changing and adapting as a comedian, right? Whether it's what the narrative demands, or whether it's just the context of what your comedy is being set in, or the situation that you are living in. But do you feel, and I've heard this sometimes, that the fame insulates you from what's going around, or maybe you just become lazy, saying, you know what, fuck it, I made it this far, I don't need to change, I don't need another iteration for people to consume. So what is the sort of, I don't know what you feel about it, like what's the landscape with these more established comedians? And I'm talking across age groups, from like my age, which would be like 40s to the 60s, people in their 60s. So what is happening?
I think I saw Chappelle's recent film, and you know, I thought it was great. And people keep asking what I thought of his gay material. It's like, it's not gay material, he just talks about gay men in it. And what he says is, gay men are liberal until it comes to skin color, which is a really funny line, and true.
Yeah.
And really accurate. And I think that Chappelle's just doing what Chappelle does. And I think that he likes to get the sort of feedback he's received, both praise and also a lot of criticism. He enjoys it. He likes the idea that comedy is still talked about, and he likes the idea that jokes could still change people's minds. And I think, like you said, I think Seinfeld is so famous, and he just thinks, why should I change my style? I've done pretty well.
Yeah.
I think I'll stick with this. And I think that he had presented this joke that had offended these students in a way. Now, I wish he had done a bit around it. That would have been better, because then it's more material for him. And I've never seen I go to, like, Jimmy Carr got in trouble in the UK recently for his Christmas video where he did a joke about gypsies.
Yes, I read about that. I mean,
he first did a trigger warning though to the video, so he warned people first, and then the video was called Jimmy Carr's dark material. So you already knew, and plus it's Jimmy Carr. If you've been watching for 20 years, you know what he does.
Yeah.
So people,
and the stuff was on his Netflix special, so it was before.
Yes.
Yeah. So this
months
was
before it was criticized.
Yeah.
I think that the media just picked it up and ran with it because they would sell papers. I don't know why people get interested or go with this stuff. But again, I like it because I like that comedy is still discussed. And I think that, you know, whatever is the age gap, whatever type of older comedians, I just think that they are trying desperately to stay relevant, because no matter how famous you are, you know that there's 30 or 40 behind you who are crawling up very quickly, who want what you have and more. And it's an incredibly competitive business, thank God, because it makes people sharper.
Yeah.
But also, you know, I think there are people who respond to certain different. That's why when they compare comedians and say during the Edinburgh Fringe, which is really a comedy festival now, when they do a review where they group through for comics in the review and they compare them, it's so ridiculous because all of us are so different.
Yeah.
And we're all attempting something unusual, especially at the Fringe where people are doing, like you said, personal stories based on past experience. You know, that show is particular, and when you compare them to one another, you're better off comparing the comic to the audience that was there that night, because at least that's that one experience. So
yeah, the year I went, Hannah Gatsby won her show as the best show at the Fringe. Yeah, and I mean, that really split people, especially not with gay or lesbian. It just split people who found it, like they found it, I don't know, some people found it like, oh my God, it's new age comedy. And some people like, where's the joke, right? So, I mean, that's an audience discretion, right? I'm not saying it's right or wrong, but I also, that's one thing I noticed, like the more political or the more, statement your show made, it would get more reviews at the Fringe. I don't know if that's true or not.
At the Fringe,
But
definitely, sure. I mean, if you try to take a show with this laden with statements on the road, you might have a problem when you leave Zone
yeah,
1 in London and go out. And I think that, I think Hannah's a great. I've only seen Hannah live on the circuit as a circuit comedian before she won that award at the
yeah.
Fringe. And I thought she was very funny. And I hope she continues doing whatever she does. I don't know what she's doing right now. I don't really follow people online very much. But I do know that what an audience wants is to know a little bit more about the performer they're watching by the end of the show than they did at the beginning.
Yeah.
So if you can show them, reveal, as like an onion when you peel the layers back,
Yeah.
if you can keep peeling to reveal a bit more scent or smell, as it were, the audience, I think, will respond favorably. And I think that's all they want. They want also to be confident that you know what you're doing. I know it's a bit hack probably, but I tell it what I think is a strong joke at the very beginning of my set, so that then I can take them where I want. They just want to know that you can do it. And then they're not going to be embarrassed, because it's a real thing in the US and the UK too, about the idea of watching someone and cringing because they don't know what they're doing.
It's
not
almost
really
like
about
you're the
material.
helmsman, right? You're in control of the cruise, and you take them on these waters, even if it's choppy. But if they know what you're doing, they're like, "Yeah,
Yeah.
this guy is a good pilot, and he knows, or she knows their way around this." And as opposed to someone
knows.
who's going to fall off the bow of the ship, going
Yes.
off. So you can do the safest joke, but it's going to plunge into the water. Yeah, yeah. No, it's.
Yeah, yeah,
I
yeah.
think that's an amazing thing for people to understand, because you get so caught up in your material about how dark it is or edgy it is. Little do you focus on how you're presenting it to them, right? Because you can be the most sort of prepared comedian when it comes to your rehearsed your lines, or you've written the joke in all its iterations, every word is, but if you say it like a piece of shit, no one's
But
going
we
to
do sometimes in London. There's so much work that I'll do 3 shows in a night, and by the time I've run across London for the 3rd show, my mind's spinning about all sorts of other things than the show. And when I get up on stage there, I forget for a moment sometimes that this is that audience's only comedy show that night, and this might be the only comedy show some of them have ever seen. So it's a big night for some of these people,
Yeah.
and you have to make it a big night for them. And it's not just. I mean, for us, it becomes a job sometimes, or we just
yeah.
appear, but you have to remember that it's a fresh experience for them. The likelihood is, and so I try to sometimes, I try to get there a bit early and just watch the show from their angle. I try to stand behind them and kind of get a feeling, a temperature for the room before I go up. It's just for them, so that the show is alive. It's not just this dead animal I'm throwing on stage and kicking around. It's something that they can enjoy, and they can be playful too. I just want to play with them a little bit for 20, 25 minutes or half hour.
Because you come, sometimes you're saying, you get overwhelmed with your own journey, saying, oh, that joke didn't do well, that person killed harder. And when you come for this show, you're carrying all that baggage, and I think you forget that, wait a second, these are a new audience and they have their own stories going on. I think it happens, yeah. And just to sort of lead into that, because you're a regular at the Comedy Store, which for people who haven't been to London is a sort of big club there. Of course, they have one in California, but this is a different one. So I want to ask you, I think there are a few things to sort of talk about here. One is, how's it been after the lockdown? Has the store did it take a big hit? And maybe how that has been for you, having a regular gig there.
Well, I think the store is doing all right now. They have reopened, and I think that they had a bit of, the famous ladies in the press, they had a bit of help from the UK government, as a lot of businesses did, to keep them afloat during the pandemic. And what I've heard about some of the larger clubs is that they had to make an agreement with the UK government when they took this funding that they would represent the communities more. So when they reopened, they would have a more diverse bill, which they have. The Comedia in Brighton, the Comedy Store here, and I think some of the other larger clubs. The Glee might have agreed to this as well. And so the bills are intentionally diverse now, with comedians, some of whom I've never heard of. And I dropped by to watch the show at the store, and it was what I thought the strategy might have been was they mixed the diverse comedians with some more experienced ones.
Yeah.
So the audience got a taste of all sorts of comedy, which I thought was fantastic.
Yeah.
So what they're seeing now, the night I was there, was a very, very experienced, well-loved comedian hosting the show. and opening the show and putting on somebody at first. And the middle acts, kind of the safer spots, because the audience is a bit well oiled at that point.
Yeah, yeah.
And so those comedians were a bit fresher, a bit newer to the scenes, people, again, I hadn't heard of. And they did really well. The audience kind of, when a woman walked on stage, I won't tell you her name, I don't want to represent anybody, but when she walked on stage to her set, I heard an enthusiastic intake of air, because it might have been the women in the audience thinking, oh, finally, a female on stage, you know?
Yeah.
And then, and that same reaction when the other comics, one of whom was another woman of mixed race, and then another guy. So, you know, these are comedians that, young for one thing, that this audience may have never seen. There was just so much enthusiasm and excitement in the room. There was a buzz.
Nice.
And then the closing act was, again, a very, very experienced comedian who's fantastic and rips the roof off every time.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
So the audience was assured that what they were seeing was a show that opened well and closed well. The middle part, we don't know. And I love that they're taking that risk. Thank God.
Yeah.
Finally, you know, I mean, it gives everybody a chance, right? And it may mean a little bit less work for someone like me who's been around for quite a while. But, you know, I'll find work elsewhere. You know, I got this GB News thing. I may do something else. I'm going back to the US. I'll tour. I'll figure it out. And what I like is that it's like taking comedy and giving it a refresh on your computer screen, hitting that button that kind of downloads the homepage again, and it's all a bit different. It's kind of the same, but it looks brighter and seems a bit more contemporary.
Yeah, yeah.
So great. Look, it's still a room full of people who want to hear jokes. That's never going to change.
And that's what I like about the early sort of exposure early on I had to career comics, especially not the ones who are doing arenas or stadiums. Like I'm talking about the likes of like a Michael McIntyre, or I think were the comedians I met who came down from London to Bombay for the Comedy Store. And one thing I noticed is, even though they might have done that same bit for 20 years, or they might be a little disillusioned by the industry and they might not like what is happening and how they got passed over by an agent or whatever, when they deliver the joke or they do their set, man, it feels like they're doing it for the first time. Like, and that energy, it's flawless. And a person like me, who at that point was a comedian starting out, to an audience member, just feels like they are giving their best performance for them, you know, and that feels so good.
It's great. You know, my husband works at a comedy club that I perform in a lot. I think you might have done the set there, Top Secret Comedy.
You told me about it, but I didn't get a chance because I had just come off that 30-day fringe, and I was like, no comedy for for the rest of my life.
Well, when you return, I'd love to see you there. I think you'd really enjoy it. There's 2 rooms now. It's great.
I'd love to.
And
come back,
a very youthful audience. But he sees a lot of comedy, you know. And some nights I'll go and just watch his show. I'll go to meet him there, and if I'm not working, I'll just sit and watch the entire show. It's so much fun to watch a comedy show when you're not working.
Yeah.
Oh, it's just, like you said, it feels so like the first time they've told it. And it's so interesting to see how they're going to weave their own personal experience through an idea, through a story, and where they're going with this. What I love about British comedy, too, is a lot of times there's so much wordplay that you don't know when the joke starts where it's going. You can't tell where the end game is going to be, which is really a thrill. So yeah, I envy comedians, especially at the Fringe, where they can see 20 or 30 comics in a week's time. I think it's great, and I envy that they get to experience that every year. You know, because we're working so hard up there that we don't really notice what's going on around us outside of our show.
Yeah.
Well, what's happening is new art being created all the time, which is a thrill.
It's quite an energy. Yeah. No, it's quite sometimes, you know, a little bit like, I'm like, oh, I wish, you know. I don't know if you experienced this, because you've been doing it now, you said, since the 90s, so it's almost 30 years. 94, so almost just about 30 years. You kind of, you know, you get all these peripheral thoughts when you do comedy, right? Whether it's the fame, people passing you getting passed on for someone else, you hitting a rut with your jokes, you're kind of going through an identity crisis, you kind of having a run of really good shows, but then you have a slump. So you've obviously navigated the highs and the lows, the plateauing, all of that. What would you say has been kind of your strongest undercurrent or guiding principle or pillar which has taken you through all these? I mean, if you've had these iterations or these changes, or I can pretty confidently say you've had it, because if you're an artist and you are still performing with the free expression, you've definitely had some form of it. So what has been a sort of pillar of strength for you through it all? Like maybe a trait, whatever you want to, you've had experience in your life.
I think My husband's been incredibly supportive and helpful. That's a real. If you have support at home for what you do, it really, it it's like a soft bed to fall back on. It is because I think we're our own worst enemy, comedians. I think we can say that our parents were difficult when we were children, or that our relationships with business people are hard, or that producers and promoters don't understand us. I think what stands in our own way is us. And when I've been around people who are much more successful than me, comedians I know kind of well who have just become, have exploded. Oftentimes, what I notice in conversation with them is they don't focus on barriers. They don't talk about a wall they had to overcome. They don't talk about something that blocked them. Everything is an experience that moves them forward.
Right.
And I think that's a pillar for me in my mind. I try to, if something happens that seems negative at the time, I try to think, how is this informing me?
Yeah.
And when I've had some pretty devastating failures at the Edinburgh Fringe, shows I've written that I thought were just exemplary, that just either were ignored or called garbage. And when that's happened, that was what I'm thinking when you're talking about criticism. When that's happened in the press, and I think karma is more about how you deal with stuff, not what happens to you.
Yeah.
So really, it was about me taking that criticism in and seeing where that led me. And it's, when I think, oh God, I'd like to do this and that and that, and I write out a list of stuff I like to achieve, I realize I've done most of it. So I think I've been quite lucky.
Nice.
And what I'm trying to do now is enjoy what I do. And so I'm turning gigs down, and which I don't usually do because I'm a comedy whore. I work as often as I can, but I'm saying no to certain things.
Yeah.
And I'm saying yes to things I might not have said yes to in the past because I want to do something unexpected to myself. So I'm going in directions I wouldn't usually go. And like being contracted, I've never had a pay stub. I'm under contract now. I'm basically on call with a TV network. And it's a strange feeling. It's making me feel like I just tell my husband, I'm feeling a bit kind of claustrophobic, like I'm in a little box right now. But I'm trying to see I'm trying to find the windows.
Yeah.
I'm trying to see how to open it up.
Nah, that's really refreshing to hear, because sometimes you kind of, as you said, you're your worst enemy and you're treating every experience going, oh, man, world sucks. Again, I got passed over. It's not, and you start finding things to blame, whether it's your past, whether it's the audience, whether it's society going, oh, they don't get me. I'll never be understood. And the only person who kind of gets sort of screwed by that way of thinking is you, right? No one
The common element in all that is you.
Yeah.
You're the only one who's in all that stuff. So it's probably, no, Ayurvedically, I've been following Ayurvedic practice for last year. And one thing you don't want to think of is, oh, I broke this, or I caused this, it's not you. This is the condition.
Yeah.
This is where we're at now. So what are we doing? This has not achieved what I wanted to. So how do I make that happen? And this is when I meet young people who are on social media so often now and using it so effectively. I'm like, oh my! I can't even make my headphones work, as you saw earlier. But I see young people on social media making it, like, making TikTok and all that stuff work for them.
Yeah.
And I hear older comedians complaining about it, but it's just because they don't fucking know how to do it. That's all it is. It's their lack of knowledge.
Absolutely. And
If they could use it to their benefit, they would.
I think it's also respect to people who've really cracked a formula that works for them. I think instead of being envious, I think, which is the natural instinct, going, stupid damn platform, it's ruining people's mind. I think if you take pause and say, wait a second, the way they edit that, I mean, I'm blown away sometimes how they multitask. They can cut, they can crop, they can hashtag, they can title, and it's a full-time job, and they're able, I mean, while it may be a sign of attention deficit, that they use that attention deficit to make a lot of content, and I'm just like, whoa. If I try putting up one Insta story and track it and tag it and respond to comments, I get a headache. Like, I'm like, whoa,
I know.
It's too fast.
That takes me a few days.
Yeah, it's like...
I have a friend of mine who's on Twitter, he's on Twitter 20 times a day, and he's got a YouTube channel where he releases a video every few days. And some of his videos are 14 minutes long of him talking to camera. He's also got 38,000 followers on YouTube for a reason. And he's making income on YouTube because he works at it really hard.
Yeah.
I put on one video a week and I feel like I should get an award or keys to the city or something because I've done that one thing. So,
Which we don't get, yeah.
Well, for me, live performance is still what I think about the most.
That's so. I want to ask you, I don't know if there's a contrast, but of course, times have changed. I don't want to like say, oh, back in the day, how was it? But with YouTube, with, the platforms, with conventional media moving over to these new platforms, how has it been for you as a road comic, like, or a traveling comedian, whatever the word or the label may be, kind of managing like your revenue? Like, have you relied entirely on stand-up? Has that been your bread and butter, or do you kind of find side gigs to get you money and you just love stand-up because it's what you love doing?
Well, we did really well on IGTV during the year of 2020 to 2021. A lot of people contributed. My husband and I were surprised. We did all right. It made me think maybe I should just do this. But
nice. Right.
But then live performance came back, and I do okay in California again because I do local radio there, which sells tickets. It's really strange, but it does. So I can tour around different parts of the U.S. and do my own show, which is nice. And then,
excellent.
Thank God for wineries and breweries. I don't drink, but breweries all build these ridiculously expensive, beautiful stages in them for live music, and then don't use them because they're brewmasters, and all they're thinking about is their brew. So if you go to them and say, "Can I do a comedy show?" They're like, "Yeah, just do it. I don't want to know." And then you keep the door. And they don't care. They just want people drinking their booze. So there's a way to manipulate your current circumstance. I've always been okay. I'm Italian, Genovese, by the way. So, and we're good at making money. So I've always been all right at creating an income. I'm obviously not rich. I'm talking to you, but I've always been.
Whoa. Okay. I was going to say there was some
you're the rich one. You're the only one. But I've always been prepared and capable of paying my mortgage.
That's really good. No, I mean, I'm trying to understand as someone in a kind of a new comedy scene, which has more elements than the US or the UK comedy scene, where, of course, there are different dynamics there. There are different elements that are different. But here, we might be all Indian and we might be of the same race, but there is language which is so diverse in India. So they have also the socioeconomic reach, which is you have tier 1 cities, tier 2 cities, tier 3. Then you have within that you have the different people who think in English, speak in English, people who think. So it's just so many different things. I'm just trying to understand because before the lockdown, I got to a place going, man, I'm focusing more on the things that aren't important, like who's famous, who's not, who's got this platform, who's doing better, who's selling out tickets, and that time when I had a reset during the lockdown has given me a fresh perspective. So hearing this again from someone who's done it for so many years like you is just a breath of fresh air and a reminder of why I do this, because my focus, like you, has always been I love doing live shows, whether it's 10 people or 40 people. I haven't done arenas or stadiums, but I love every show I've done. And of course, reminding yourself of this is really important,
Yeah, it is. And I think a lot of people went through a refresh during the year 2020 to 21. I think some people left the business because they thought, why am I working so hard to feel underappreciated? And that's fine. They made that choice.
Yeah.
Like I said, right before the pandemic, my husband and I were talking about sort of a semi-retirement because we want to get a dog. We want to settle down. We're flying around so much. We're very active all that way.
Yeah.
And we thought, is this the life we want? Should we rethink? And then when everything was ripped away from me immediately, that was a refresh because I thought, wait a minute, I really miss that expression. That was restorative to me to be able to do stand-up, to clear my mind and talk about things on a stage in front of people and try to work stuff out. So it reminded me how important live performance was for me, for the audience, for the world. And it's one of the few places where you can talk about issues most people won't discuss at a dinner party or in an office, where you can work out political differences and socioeconomic concerns that people have in a comedic way. That's really, for some people, the most effective way to solve a problem. So it put me back on stage appreciatively. And it forced me, and probably you and a lot of us, to reconsider, how, like you said, how we can make an income, which I liked. And then I've always been a bit lucky professionally. So when I very first started, I was still an actor, and I was in a couple of films that catapulted me onto a mainstream comedy stage as a headliner. Wow. It was really the films that made people think I could do that. And luckily, because I'd been an actor for so long, and because I had so much stage time under my belt already because of AIDS, thank God for AIDS, it made me the comic I never would have been. with AIDS, we had to do all these benefit performances, and there were so few comics that were working the mainstream that were openly gay. I was being flown all over the country to perform at the Dorothy Chandler Pavilion in fucking DC in New York in front of, like I said, 1,000 people to do a 20-minute set. I've been doing comedy for 2 years, but there were no other gay men doing it. So we got an AIDS benefit. Put the queer up. Let him close. Fingers crossed. And of course the audience, oh, he's gay and he's still alive. You know, that was on my side too. I'm sure they were kowtowing a lot to me because I was white and queer and still breathing. So thank God there's no. Cancer.
I take whatever you get at that point.
Well, exactly. Like we said earlier. So, you know, and because I had that stage time under my belt when Mrs. Doubtfire opened or when Star Wars opened, I was able, you know, I was able. Maybe not have been the best headliner choice, but I was capable. So that those things have always rolled my way, fortunately. So now this TV thing I'm doing now sort of happened after the pandemic, and I'm sort of taking advantage of it to see where this goes, because a lot of the clubs in the UK have not reopened, or those that have are, you know, they're struggling for a while financially, so the salaries are not as high as they were before. We're waiting for them to catch up, and in the meantime, this is how we're getting by. And I always trust that at some point something else is gonna. I've never had a money problem. I've been doing live performance for almost 30 years, and it's never been. But I don't have kids. There's that. So I know if I had kids, it would have been a different story.
Yeah, it's encouraging though. I mean, to hear for someone like me who's been in it for 12, 13 years, or someone listening right now who's been in it for 5 years, that you have to be smart about it. You can't just say, you know, turn down gigs because, oh, you know, I can only do dark material. You have to adapt. But just to know that you can do live gigs and you don't have to be, you know, managed by massive agencies and be on all these reality shows. That's not the only route. While that is an option.
Just do what you like. Do what you want and hope the audience finds you. That's always the case. And also, you have offspring now. You have Meatloaf you have to look after, and that's
not yet. Soon. Actually, no. By the time this episode's out, maybe the little one will be out by then.
Oh, sweet. But it will change. It's like getting a law degree. Watch my husband struggling with it. It will change who you are and what you talk about, and that's going to put an amount of pressure on you. Maybe you've expected, maybe you don't. I don't know. But again,
you know, my biggest problem, Scott, like that on that front is, you know, sometimes now when I'm doing Zoom shows or corporate shows just after the lockdown, people are calling. I kind of go back to old material, like from what I've been doing at earlier corporates, and I'm just like watching myself as an outsider performing these jokes, and I'm like, I don't feel them at all. But then I did this fundraiser a couple of weeks back, and I mean, of course, a lot of it was, I mean, I'd say a good 30-40% was some of the corporate stuff I do. But some of the new stuff I tried, it's not brand new, but it's some of the stuff I was working out just before the lockdown and we could get on stage. I really enjoyed that, and that thrill made me feel really happy. It wasn't like a proper, put together set. It was just I was dropping these one-liners here, doing a little story there. That energy, getting it back going, this is the thrill of doing something which you're not sure is going to work, and it working and people laughing, as opposed to just doing the stuff on autopilot going, oh, yeah, here we go, keeping the paycheck in mind. And I'm really glad that I could do that, you know, and I'm excited. As you said, these things happen, and you kind of are faced with a new chapter in life, and that's the excitement of what is that going to let me talk about, you know?
Yeah. I think the audience can tell, they can sense that enthusiasm, and I think that's why it's always great. Sometimes I'll open with some new gags because it ups the energy for me, and if they go, especially if they go well, and the audience can tell that you feel excited about this, and that to you this feels like it feels new. They really get into it. Yeah, that's why I think the Edinburgh Fringe is so. That's why I've done so many of them. I know the stress of writing a new show and the torture of rehearsing it, getting it right. But when you go and after a week or two up there, you're doing it every day, the same venue, when you feel it starts to fall into place, it's so great, such a fantastic. And when you feel like this will be an hour I can now tour for the next 8 or 10 or 12 months and enjoy. Yeah. And I think one great thing about new material too is, especially because you might have 30 or 60 minutes on stage, if the show is well written, even if it's not ready, but if it's good and it's real, you can feel it grow as the festival takes off. You can actually feel the show expand like a balloon, and like with your air blowing into it, like it feels like, and then like a hot air balloon, although that's a bad term for comedy, but like it feels like it takes off at some point. It really feels. I love that.
No, it's
experience with it.
I totally. I mean, my show
A
didn't
lot of
get
comments.
any reviews. People are like, "Why do you go spend so much money there?" And like, I don't. They're like, no one cares about the Fringe in India. And I heard all the statements. But when I came back and did that show, like it felt effortless. Like it felt like it's second nature to me. Like because I'd practiced that show, even though when it went to the Fringe, it wasn't ready. But when I came back, I was a master of that show. Maybe not the best show I've written, but I felt so good doing it. I
Yeah,
could
yeah,
literally not think about it, but the timing was perfect. The
yeah, yeah.
delivery was great. I didn't have to grab for words. It was not. I hadn't written down the show at all. I went in the way I typically go. It was just points. I said those points over and over for 20 odd days, and it just came together. And I was like, I completely understand what you're saying. Just like this person has, the entity has grown with you, and now you can
Yeah.
just sort of enjoy that experience over multiple weeks or months to decide how many shows you decide to do. It's fantastic. So.
Yeah.
Are you? What's plans next? I mean, are you going to go to the Fringe this year? What's the thing with what show can people expect, especially
Oh,
if they're
right.
listening right now in the UK? Just do a plug for whatever you're doing.
All right. I'm just doing some, like I said, that GB stuff, and then I'm doing some solo stuff coming up. I'm going to Berlin this weekend
Ah,
to do some
nice.
shows there, and then Ireland, and I'm going to Northern Europe, Sweden, and Denmark to do some stuff
Oh,
in May.
nice. So
Yeah, it'll be
everything's back
fun.
open. Yeah.
Yeah, it'll be good. And then I'm going to Lisbon to do some things just around Europe and in London. I'm trying to do as many solo shows as possible, and then we go back to the US where I only do solo things.
Right.
And we're there for a few months, and we come back here, and we want to spend Christmas in a warm climate.
Yeah.
That's our intent.
Come to India.
And
I'm right
then,
here.
yeah, that's it. My husband's going to go visit his family in Brazil. We're trying, as the pandemic subsides, we're trying to get some of that. I had to cancel so many gigs in 2020. I'm trying to regain them and
Yeah, yeah,
actually do
yeah.
them now. So,
Oh, that must have burnt. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
how about you?
Yeah, not much planned. I work wise, I'm doing this. I'm really enjoying this. I'm going to continue doing this because, of course, I can do it from home. A couple of shows here and there, but I'm not doing anything left in April. I don't know when this is going to come out, but April, I'm waiting for. My wife might go like anytime after. I don't know when this comes out, but like second half of April, early May is when our baby's due. So I'm not taking anything up till then, and even after. I don't know if I'm allowed to take anything on, so I have to ask my wife because she's like, "Where are you? I need your help." And I'm like, "I'm on stage, just having a good." Yeah, so maybe I think my next confirmed gig is on the 18th of May, if I'm not mistaken. But yeah, I'm excited to write a new show, continue doing this podcast, and just I think something has changed in me, and I'm excited to share that with people who come to watch my show, and also share that with people who I consider a friend. Like, even though we've never sort of grown up in the same city, just met a few times, but we just sort of got along on a certain wavelength. And I was so excited when you said you want to get on the show and talk, and this is what keeps me going. So I think on that note, Scott, I really appreciate you for everything you've done and for everything you helped me with, and all the best for for your husband and you, your future and your plans, and for your live gigs. Good luck, and thanks so much
Thank
for
you.
being on this episode with me.
Thank you. Namaste. Good luck with your kid.
Thank you. I'll let you know when. I'm pretty confident it's a girl. They don't let us know in India what the gender is, but I'm
Really?
pretty. Yeah, they don't tell us because some many Indians don't like to have baby girls. I mean, it's a stupid thing, but yeah, they're a bunch of cunts. But we're not that,
Well,
so we're excited.
congratulations.
In respect. Thank you, my friend. I
Yeah.
really appreciate it, and yeah, hopefully you come to India or I get to London and we meet again and go for a nice meal and get on stage together. Remember the show we did together in Bangalore was called The Minority Report? Because I think for the first
I
time it was a
remember it
gay
very
guy and a
well.
blind guy. Yeah, that was so
I
much
remember
fun.
that the only criticism I got from the audience, I think, was a woman who asked why I made fun of marriage, how I could do that. It wasn't about that it was gay or marriage equality, none of that. She older lady, she's like, I don't see anything funny about marriage. How could you do that? I don't think that's funny.
Oh,
Which was hilarious.
and
So I
your
thought
show
it
at
was
that
funny.
point was called Homophobia, and I was like, that's brave doing it in India at that point. But you really got the audience you wanted. I think that really nice kind of crowd
Listen,
showed
I
up.
have nothing but fond memories about that experience, and
Yeah.
I would love to go back there. I really enjoyed the time
Do
we
come
spent there.
back. Give me a heads up because you know what? I think I sort of got to this place where you don't need to be a comedy producer. You don't have to be. I think with the number of years I've done comedy, especially in Bangalore and a couple of other cities with friends who are comedians, you let me know in advance how many shows you want to do, what sort of numbers you're looking at, like 50 seaters, 100 seaters. You and I can tour, do it. Let's put it together. And if you
I'd
want,
love to.
yeah.
Yeah.
So I'm excited about that. Stay in touch. Good luck with everything,
Right.
and yeah, I'll let you know when things open up and I'm traveling or you're traveling, and let's do some live gigs together.
I'd love to. All right. Good luck.
Thanks, Scott. All the best. Talk to you soon.